Hey beloved, Reverend Naomi King here. I would like to talk to you today about being weary. I'm hearing that a lot from folks. I'm feeling it at times myself. There's just so much that a person can take in, suffer, or deal with, or learn about before weariness sets in. We're finite beings. And even though we live in a world full of machinery that doesn't necessarily need the kinds of rest we do need rest. Indeed, rest can be a revolutionary act. It's pushing against the idea that is so deeply embedded in colonialism and in white supremacy that says we have to be productive to be worthy, and productive according to society's terms. In fact, there are all kinds of policies and laws that penalize people who suffer from poverty because of this thing about needing to be more productive and not recognizing the truth of the capitalist system, which is that one needs surplus labor in order to keep wages down. So what are you going to do with those people who aren't just labor, who are more than labor? And how do you afford a quality of life and dignity for folks? This brings us back to the struggle for justice and the experiences of dispossession, displacement, and oppression that people are suffering these days. It can be so odd to be forced to stay where one lives and still feel dispossessed or displaced. And yet I hear that and read that over and over again as people's experiences trying to learn how to live in a world where everything that many people took for granted has changed. If you're somebody who's always taken your health for granted, if you've been an able-bodied person moving through the world, and if you've had a relative amount of other kinds of privileges, this might indeed be an incredibly shocking time to have to learn how it is that folks who live with immune suppression and people who have more limited mobility may be living in your communities. You don't see them necessarily, and you may not know them unless they're part of your family, or in some lucky cases, co-workers, because so many people living with disabilities are working, and then there's so many more who are not. And those of us who are working may have more hidden disabilities. That's allowed us to continue to work in certain circumstances, but in these today, with like a pandemic, not so much, not in the same way. There's lots of reasons why people are feeling weary right now. We can only learn so much in a given period of time, and we can only do so much, and we can only have so little to do for very long before that in and of itself is wearying, tiring for the soul, for the body, for the mind, because of the lack of engagement, stimulation, eustress, good stress, a little bit of challenge that we need in our lives in order to have a sense of well-being. And so we come back to, so many of us are weary of dealing with oppression out in the world, weary of dealing with the results of structural inequities that just are exacerbated during this period of pandemic, weary and wanting relief. Have you ever had a chance when you've been really, really tired, like just barely managing to stay awake, to reach a place where you can lay down, and then how wonderful that can feel? And then you can't sleep because everything else is just continuing to go on in your head and in your heart. It's restlessness. The body may have reached beyond its limitations, And the mind may keep going, trying to protect because of this sense of stress and trial and trouble. I've been there, and I'm sure I'll be there again in various times in my life. And I try a couple of different techniques. One of them is prayer. Sometimes it's just very helpful for me to drop into a prayerful space and go ahead and take 10 minutes, 15 minutes, and lay out my burdens. Take them off, just like I did my clothes before and put on my night clothes before I go to bed. That's part of that nighttime ritual. Just like I brush my teeth. These sorts of mental hygiene or spiritual hygiene is also really important. The sense that we're going through the process ritual of, at the end of our day, and putting the stuff we can't deal with and we need to put aside so that we can rest, and we can pick that up tomorrow. And some people I know also literally ritualize that, perhaps with something like a stone that they drop into the water, a little bowl of water next to the bedside table, or at a special altar space that they may keep in their house, or they may invite smoke and bathe themselves in the breath of sage, in a little cleansing incense, in a scent that signals you're entering a sacred time called the time for sleep. Now, I view all time as sacred. Not everybody does. That is going to vary from culture to culture and viewpoint around the world. But even if you view time as sort of regular, maybe profane and sacred, if we can sacralize rest, remembering that this is indeed so very important to us, so important that the Bible has us setting aside a day just to rest, the Sabbath, that those nightly rhythms are so important for relaxing our bodies, for relaxing the mind, and for creating the space to have dreams and tissue renewal and all those good things, letting the whole being be held and feeling safe and belonging. Now that's a real challenge if we're trying to sleep in a place where we aren't safe and we don't feel belonging. And every night that I can go to bed in a place that's safe and I can feel belonging, I give thanks for that, because those are in fact privileges in our society. There are so many people who've done nothing wrong, children even, that are imprisoned because of their migration status, because of policies, practices, and judgments of discrimination. And so to have a safe place to rest is another rallying point for justice makers. And knowing that I could get all worked up again to go back out instead of taking the rest that I need so that I can show up tomorrow and the day after and the day after that the best I can. Rest is important. Our lives don't work well without it. And especially when we're trying to become more skillful around perhaps anti-racism or anti-ableism or anti-oppression of all kinds of practices. And perhaps as we're learning how to become more skillful as a society in navigating, living with this pandemic, as we invite one another into conversations across political lines to try to figure out skillfully how to build the society in which all may thrive, the things that we might agree upon and can work together for. We still need rest. Rest that gives us space to dream. Rest that nurtures the imagination. And yes, rest that says, no, I'm not a machine. I'm actually a human being. And the exploitation ends at this point, putting a limit, a boundary on it. You don't need to be productive in your sleep. You just need rest. So if you're feeling extra weary, may you give yourself that permission to find the rituals leading into rest that help you put down the day, put aside what's bothering you and what hurts, and tend to the beauty and the wonder and, that most important of all things, the actual sleep and rest. I wish you well. I wish you a good night, a good sleep. If you're working the night shift, I wish you a good day's sleep in blessed darkness so that your body can fully rest. And may we all remember and be a little more gracious with each other. A lot of folk are weary, and a lot of folk are impatient, and a lot of folk need change right now. And that still doesn't mean anything if you're tired, except that you need to sleep now and then get up tomorrow and get back to the work. Wishing you well, justice, and peace.